snowy Ann Arbor and arriving in Skolkovo. I would like to introduce you Sergei Sisar, who is professor at Moscow Architecture School, which together with our morning presenter, Olga Rexakova, and they co-founded it and co-started it in many ways. He's also an independent architectural critic, architect, exhibition curator, and designer. He co-authored a series of strategic development programs for regional centers in Russian Federation, including Norilsk, Sochi, we all know Sochi, where Olympic Games, last Winter Olympic Games happened, and other cities in Russia. He's also a theory editor of Project International Architectural Magazine, and he is going to give us a fascinating lecture. Welcome.
Thank you very much for attending, and again, thanks to the organizers for considering and managing such an exciting event. This conference. It's a great pleasure to be here, and now we are getting back to Skolkovo, this sad story, and it seems that I'm going to start right where Olga has finished, and yeah, the question that was consistently present in the audience was why does it happen in Skolkovo as it happens in Shenzhen. So my talk is going to be devoted basically to this question and to some hypothesis, some quite plausible answer to this question, which I think leads to the second question. The second question is the title of this lecture. Maybe this reason why it doesn't happen in Skolkovo rises up the question whether we should rethink the grounds of technological development, like generally speaking. And okay, there was this, in the end of this lecture, was this image of the, well, actually the first big building constructed on the territory of this Skolkovo Innovation City, and it's by actually a friend of mine, Boris Bernaslavich, quite a young architect who somehow happened to be close to Surkov and Medvedev, so he got this commission in kind of very traditional Russian way. Yeah, nice work. But Olga designated this huge atrium as an internal emptiness. Yeah, it is empty inside, but on the other hand, it's also quite auspicious that it has the shape of this traditional Russian toy called Matryoshka. Matryoshka doll, you probably know it. And I think that there is some kind of ambiguity and irony embedded in this like architectural composition, architectural image, we should say, which deserves some discussion. I mean, this guy with Boris, he's not, just fooling around. It's not that simple as it seems, because he seems to be. And of course, this Matryoshka doll is very kind of important and powerful cultural symbol. First of all, you probably know that it's a kind of layered tool. Each doll contains a smaller doll, and the second one contains the first. Smaller. So it's kind of both a symbol of infinity and kind of emptiness. It's kind of symbol where infinity and emptiness coincide, and it's actually a very Eastern notion, as I understand. And the doll itself actually comes from Japan, but the type of toy, but it's almost like forgotten, and it should look kind of strange that this kind of first prominent building built on the side has this thing inside, and I mean, the irony of this is that Skolkovo conceived as a kind of window to the West. On the other hand, it should have some kind of national and kind of, even we can arguably say, a deeply philosophical symbolism embedded in it. These are two photographs from the kind of pre-opening event of this building, which was recently inaugurated, and the inauguration was supported by the exhibition of contemporary art. And here you see the title, which is at the same time a motto of this exhibition, and it's also a kind of pun and oxymoron, because it says literally, innovation is Russian tradition, and innovation and tradition are opposed terms. So yeah, the kind of deep irony is absolutely obvious here in this choice of a title. And then I want to shift to I think a beautiful and really penetrative book by an American professor, a researcher. His name is Lauren Graham, and he, I think, is here in Harvard. He collaborated with many prominent American institutions like Columbia, and he's known here and already in Russia as probably the most authoritative and the most committed researcher of the history of Russian science. And this book is devoted more or less to the recollection of the prominent kind of most bright moments of this history of Russian science and invention, but it also includes a chapter on Skolkovo and Rosnano, and contains some qualification of these two projects. Rosnano was launched a bit earlier. It's not an innovation city, it's just a big kind of state corporation devoted to development of nanotechnologies in Russia. And the difference is not only that it doesn't have really a territory, it has many branches all over the world by now, but also it received much more money. It received about $18 billion from the Russian government without being aimed at bringing some profit. It was just supposed to support startups in nanotechnology. And now it looks like it's also kind of in great decline and almost bankrupt. And Skolkovo received just $2 billion compared to Rosnano. It's kind of not a big deal again. But the book is, as I say, is probably is the most penetrative text I've read in English about what's going on in Russian science and in Russian culture, actually. So it was a surprise, and it's also a sign of the world really getting smaller, and we start to understand each other better. Although I have some reservations, and maybe first of them is that you see it has a subtitle which resonates with the title of our conference. Contested innovation. Here he asks, can Russia compete? This is his kind of main question. In Russian context, and precisely as he characterizes it, other questions seem no less relevant. First of all, of course, does Russia have a chance to defeat in the present situation and present realities? The second, probably, and probably even more important, does it have to defeat? This question appears like an absolutely natural in contemporary Russian context. And then, for what sake, and will it eventually, and how can, if it will. But he has a very particular take on this ambiguous situation, on this kind of hesitant condition of contemporary Russian scientific mind. And I will come to it. And also, the value of this book, I think, mainly lies in that he actually rises up or brings to the fore a very important question concerning this situation, which, in fact, well, in Russia it's never being discussed. It's like almost absent from our horizon, but not because it's something irrelevant or it's somehow inadequate, but the opposite, because it's a question which everybody knows. It's a question which is like so seamlessly sort of coincides with the condition of Russian, I don't know, mind, especially if we talk about members of so-called intelligentsia. So nobody actually raises suspicion because it's like ultimately rhetorical. But the question is in fact important, and I think that we will proceed to discussing it also within Russia. But before we come to it, this is just the major part of his book devoted to listing all the kind of brilliant achievements of different Russians in different times in all directions of technology, starting, of course, with Industrial Mega Project. These were pioneering in terms of scale, in terms of ability to mobilize resources. Then space project, of course, it's a commonplace. Then also railroads, and for example, we find out that the first diesel locomotive in Europe was built by Russians. Then iron industry, but Mikhail Kalashnikov probably the only guy who is really known outside of Russia among Russian inventors. Actually, encountered recently results of the questionnaire conducted in Britain, and people were asked to list 100 living geniuses, and there were only 2 Russians in this list. First was Kalashnikov, and the second was Garry Kasparov, who's kind of half Russian, we could say, half Armenian. And on the first place, I think, was Matt Groening, surprisingly. You know, no, Matt Groening. Author of Futurama animation. And the second guy was Hoffman, LSD inventor. And it was like 20,000 people answered to present it. It's also contemporary condition in the world. Okay, I won't comment on all this. I mean, for me, it was surprising in many positions. Like, for example, first LED was invented in Russia already somewhere in 20s. Lasers also in 20s-30s first. And then guys got Nobel Prizes, also one Russian guy, but got Nobel Prize for lasers only in the 60s. And a lot of computers, television, you probably know Zworykin, Okay, so this part is supposed to be kind of flattering for Russia. But then he comes to his kind of main point, and yeah, this could be read as also the kind of motto of this book, a core force. For 300 years, Russia has been adept in developing clever technical ideas and abysmal in benefiting from that. And then he kind of elaborates on that. What does he mean by that? And then he analyzes Rusnano and Skolkovo. He comes to this also quite skeptical conclusion that both Rusnano and Skolkovo are top-down government-directed efforts, and Russia has not yet escaped from its age-old trap of what he calls his kind of term, a trap of fits and starts. And this means that Russia is very good in kind of starting things. There are kind of really brilliant minds that come up with absolutely genius ideas.
Brilliant ideas.
Kind of,
Valuable ideas.
yeah, but then, well, something just begins, and very soon it gets kind of stuck. And then this pattern repeats itself, and so on. And this is why Russia was abysmal in benefiting from all this starts. Then, yeah, I want to shift to Russia as a territory, and there are these also famous NASA images of night Earth captured from space, and I think this image of the territory of Eurasia gives a really an important key to understanding of relation of Russian territory to technology, and through technology to all other cultural and political, in fact, issues. So what we see in this image, we see actually two things. This one is a little bit brighter. The first is Russian territory is something, all this kind of absolutely vast territory. Part of it, the northern part of it, is probably not that livable in terms of climate. But still, the second thing we see is that the technological development, as we can judge from seeing all this electrical light, is really uneven. So, European part, of course, it's less dense than in the neighboring Europe, the network of electricity and so on, and urbanization. It shows the pattern of urbanization. But further we get from Europe, it almost kind of melts and evaporates in this vast darkness. So the pattern which we can detect here is actually a very biological pattern, which in biology is actually termed a true root system. There is a diffused root system without a major stem, a major root. And here you see clearly there's one major root which connects this vast territory to where? To Europe. So it's kind of a root of Europe somehow, right? Something is coming from Europe and something goes to Europe. Of course, it's mainly resources. So it's kind of very a territory very naturally predisposed to be a supplier of resources for European highly urbanized civilization. And the third aspect, of course, is this kind of vague, I think, connection to China. It's just kind of forming, but maybe in the course of I don't know, few decades, it will become a real bridge that hopefully would happen between East and West. So what follows from this is understanding that, in fact, the development of a territory is really far from being complete. It's kind of drastically underdeveloped. And all the political regimes that function on this territory, they actually, and from long time ago, their main concern is this kind of gradual development of this territory. And the logic of development, of course, it comes from Europe. So it's kind of, the country was always ruled by people who imported the notion of culture, the notion of civilization from Europe. And they were dealing with their own population, first of all, and then with the populations of many minorities inhabiting this, Trans-Siberian plains and regions, in a way, I mean, it's similar to the United States, probably, with its kind of moving frontier, but now this movement is very complete, of course, and in Russia it's probably not. On the other hand, it's not such a argument, I don't know. It's a point to discuss. Of course, it's not the same policy as European colonizers performed in North America, because almost all ethnic minorities that existed on this territory, they not only survived, they kind of multiplied, and I worked for an research situated in this area, and also cities of Yanao region, where they have quite numerous population of local Nenets people, and they still are deer breeding. They still nomads, so they live. They make this nomadic winter moves in polar night with their deers, and without any. So they still don't use fire. They use fire weapons, but they don't use fire for some reason. And they drink warm blood from the deers, because it's kind of good for, has a lot of vitamins and good for keeping you healthy. Their children also. It looks like, when you see it, it looks like ultimately wild, but on the other hand, it's the way they live, and nobody actually really intervenes in it. And for example, they complain that they have a lot of trouble electrifying this area, because these Nenets people, they shoot isolators on this electricity towers just for fun. It's for me like a sport. Because you absolutely don't understand the meaning of this technology. And there are many stories like that. Of course, maybe it's kind of a pinky picture, or a bit embellished of what's really going on. But still, there's a position implying that what's going on in Russia in relation to the territory is something that can be defined as not as colonization, but rather as self-colonization. And it's self-colonization, the frontier of which is in fact interiorized. Like every Russian has this frontier inside of his or her own soul. It's like, on one hand, of course, there's this European culture and the all great fans of this, but on the other hand, there's this territory, and there's this question of kind of dealing with it, and this is a specific situation, historically and geographically. So this, I think, explains, probably not completely or far from being complete, but to a certain degree, the reason why all these things are so top-down, like spoke of. It's a project, and somehow it started with this planning, and Western architects complained that this Russian government commissioning this design was thinking on the first place about the buildings and landscaping, and just on the second plan about who is going to inhabit the facilities and housing quarters, and who is going to teach in the university, who is going to join the technical part. This is actually quite clear picture, and I think it's the most recent version of the design. This is a technical part where all startups are going to be situated, and part of them already are inhibited. This is a Skoltech complex designed by Herzog and de Meuron. Here you see this building, Matryoshka building, is really on place, and this also quite close to completion. This is Hypercube, the first building, also by Bernasconi. So in terms of how far it went, well, the chief manager of construction announced that well, what we have on this general plan is going to be complete this summer, so it's almost done. Yeah, it's going to be fun. And here you see, unfortunately I put it in the bottom, but it's where it's located in relation to Moscow. But you know it from Olga's presentation already. So then I want to briefly pass through what, well, in my understanding, in my perception, are the main guidelines, the main objectives, the general objectives, which Skolkovo was pursuing as an idea, as a concept. Why it was so appealing for Russian kind of enlightened Russian governments. First of all, it was meant to become a showcase PPP or GIP, and use different terminology, but you know what PPP is, public-private partnership. It's a kind of model of interaction, right? A model of business, of making business. And the GIP was actually, I think, present in description of our conference, government-industry partnership. But in fact, none of these terms directly corresponds to what's going on, because, first of all, there's no Western sense of something being public. Because government is not public. it's government. Then, the sense of private is also kind of very shaky. Then, government, industry. In terms of industry, to what extent industry is already something which is not governed? Because we have this system of oligarchs, but they all were, like, if you take a closer look, they were almost kind of assigned to become ones, except for like few cases when they demonstrated like real independence, like for example Khodorkovsky, who decided to really kind of change Russian political system and the country, and he decided to start his own big kind of education project, and then the authority said, no, it's going to stop here. And he was put to jail for 10 years. And, others, of course, started to behave more in a more kind of cautious way. Then, economical trend break. Medvedev has announced in his manifesto, which I've already mentioned, or its presidential letter, appeal called Russia Gold from 2009. Russia is oil and gas dependent country. We have to break this trend. We have to make something, some alternative that would bring Russia to the frontiers of modern civilization, let's say. Then third probably is a hub for international technological integration. So it's also a kind of an instrument of opening up, and becoming more kind of international cosmopolitan, of absorbing Western technologies and even, you could say, cultural values and Western lifestyles, for example, also, which was always happening, but starts fits and starts, kind of a dash process. And then hotbed for startups, and another term is a kind of ecology, which is a quite fancy term. It's just really, ecology, which is kind of deeply productive in terms of generating these startups and nurturing them, right? Helping them to develop. Then thief, kind of symbolic function. A catalyst, or we can also say an icon or an emblem of a new or socialist national identity. So the idea is we have to stop mourning our great Soviet past, but we also have to come up with something new, and something new should have its own face. So Skoko was meant to become such a new face to a great degree. And then last probably is a territorial driver in terms of like planning something that stimulates the development of this particular territory, right? So you install some kind of epicenter of intensity on the territory, and it should affect the surrounding territories, like a source of energy, humanity. And then if we pass through all these positions, we see that each of them became sort of injured. Okay, then I probably missed. Skip it. 10. Well, I'm talking for 20 minutes.
You're cutting into your question.
I'm sorry, I will be talking for 20 minutes?
No, over 40.
Over 40? I should have looked at my phone. Okay, I'm not even in the middle.
Oh, you have 10 more minutes.
What?
You have 10 more minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Okay, the source of, the showcase of PPP didn't work because, probably, they claim that 61% of financing comes from private sources, but in fact these sources are not really private. And the showcase model doesn't work because of this accusation in corruption and infiltration of funds. it doesn't work as an economical trend breaker because, in fact, as Olga already said, there's no kind of high-tech or innovative industry that would function as support and a driver for R&D within the country and startups. And of course it's important. Like you see in Shenzhen, it's absolutely, to my mind, it's absolutely kind of industry-driven thing. So industry comes first, and then people come and learn how to use the possibilities this industry provides. And the second issue here is actually the lack of demand in Russia for new technology or high-tech items. And these are results of recent research conducted by Higher School of Economics, and I didn't translate it because anyway we don't have time to read it in detail. But actually, it shows that it was a list of kind of potential products, starting from solar batteries and smart clock and 3D printer, smart house, all usual suspects, let's say. And people were asked whether they would buy, they would buy if they have money. And from here, it really starts. We are not ready to buy, and then we don't understand what is it really, and it goes to like openly hostile towards this new thing. And the solar battery is on top, and it's like
the second is smart clothing.
Yes, and it's like
electric cars.
Actually, middle is here, so and it's the best result. So Russia is not for it, apparently. Then hub for international integration, as I write here, HR policies show that political establishment is unwilling to cede the strategic control, so they like very carefully choose whom they put in which position. And we already discussed briefly this collaboration with MIT, and of course behind any such a collaboration, MIT was important to bring in because of the statutes, because of but there's always a threat of brain drain, and Skolkovo actually is already functioning as a kind of funnel of the brain drain, which is supposed to prevent, in fact. Okay, hotbed for startups, high rate of exit, and also already mentioned that there's no community, there's no IRC channel or internet forum of residents, there's no kind of public figures like, Ray Kurzweil, for example, or Stallman, who are kind of well known as kind of bottom-up active proponents of this technological way of development. So none of this is present in Russia. And catalyst of identity, we see it doesn't work at least practically, because Skolkovo, we're discussing Skolkovo here, but in Moscow it's almost unknown. Nobody thinks about it. There's no anything on the media, and there's also a sign. And then territorial driver. The main problem is that it's kind of top-down installation, and it has different juridical system and different system of management. Actually, some people claim that it violates Russian constitution because it negates the rules of territorial self-government, which are set in the constitution. So it's really unlikely that it somehow will help to develop the surrounding territory. Okay. The main conclusion which Lauren Graham comes with, which he makes, is that, of course, there are problems of different kinds: commercial strain, intellectual property rights, brain drain, political potential, social barriers, and climate. But behind all this, there is a main problem which he characterizes as, he kind of fears to call it a cultural problem. He prefers the word attitudinal problem. It's a problem of attitude of Russians towards new technology, and he says literally the following: Russians have never, to the present day, fully adopted the modern view that making money from technological innovation is an honorable, decent, and admirable thing to do. And then he comes with a recipe. Well, he doesn't believe that this recipe will work, but his formula deserves attention. He says, in order to become a leading participant in global high technology, Russia must reform its entire society. Russia must reform its entire society, its entire nation. It should become a normal Western nation. And another formula is it has to transform it. It is in a state where it follows the natural way of development. So, natural way of development and being a normal Western nation is kind of synonymous. West is a nature, and okay. Well, I'm so sorry. I mean,
we can have more time during our roundtable. We're just going to something.
It's like all the time. Could you give me like another 10 minutes?
We're cutting into the next lecture, so we'll have more opportunity during the roundtable. Because we're running out of time. We have to leave the room at one point. Sorry.
I can't understand how it happened today. I didn't say anything. It's just, introductory part.
But you will be able to say more during the roundtable.
I don't know.
Do you have like one last thing you want to say?
Maybe this.
Okay, I stop. I'm really stressed. I mean, I don't believe that it was kind of real time. Maybe
Same time as Marianne.
This guy was stupid. Okay, fail.
While David is setting up, are there